Welcome to Stronger Than Reason. So, first, I want to take a minute to acknowledge a milestone because we just got our 100th subscriber, and I just want to say thanks to everyone who's tuned in so far. I didn't have much of a plan when I started this. I just figured I'd bust out a new episode every now and then whenever I felt like it, just to get some things off my chest about the music I love. I had zero expectations that anyone would want to listen to this, but at least some folks have. So for that and for the encouragement you've given in the comments and reviews, I thank you. I also notice that despite doing these whenever I feel like it, I seem to average about one per week because this is the 28th week of the year and this is the 28th episode. And I doubt I'll officially ever go weekly. That's way too much pressure. It kind of goes against the casual nature of things here, but I think it'll probably stay on that average pace, I figure. But yeah, I just wanted to say thanks for coming along. I think it's good and healthy, at least for me, I think, to share some of the stuff I care about. It proves to me that it's possible to do something positive on the internet and get rewarded for it. I could have started a show about anything like politics or how screwed up everything is, just me complaining and hoping, I guess, for some commiseration. But who needs that? There's more than enough of that. I like this idea of making original content, expressing yourself. And I know I'm just reviewing old records, but I'm giving you my opinions and my personal stories interwoven with that and what it means to me. And I guess what I don't get about YouTube are the sheer number of people just reposting videos of other people's crap, like Mr. Sadface 263 starts a channel and just starts posting snippets of TV shows or videos taken right off of cable. And this guy has 200,000 followers and millions of views. He hasn't said a thing about himself. He hasn't expressed an opinion or an original thought. It's kind of like those endless Twitter accounts that have thousands of followers but do nothing but endlessly retweet. Maybe that's what people want. I don't know. I realize I'm an anachronism. I realize I'm practically a fossil. I've got one foot on the grave and another on a banana peel here. But I don't get it, The more and more I think about it, I figure social media is kind of a trap. It's an addictive time suck. It destroys imagination and creative drive. I mean, I know I sound like a stereotypical parent when I say this, but it's rotting your brain. And I can only speak for myself. But I used to do more things with my spare time. I'd read a book, I'd catch up with friends and family, I'd, mess around with electronics or make music or write or paint or just daydream, Daydreaming used to be a thing. But now I do very little of it because as soon as I have a spare 2 minutes, I have my damn phone out. I'm checking the weather, headlines, or whatever. And I'm just as guilty of that as the next person. But I have been dropping some social media, way back when I dropped Facebook and then more recently with Twitter. I became conscious of the time that those things had been taking up in my life. And I realized how easy it was to just get sucked into that. So I'm trying to adjust my own habits. I still have plenty of work to do. But you might ask, why am I telling you this? I mean, I obviously want you to hear all the profound things that I have to say. And I guess what I'm trying to say is there's a difference between, on one hand, the general noise, the clickbait, the endlessly copied crap, and everyone who's trying to sell you something. And on the other hand, a person who just wants to share their thoughts. And I wish the world would reward the latter and not the former. But the fact is, all that vapid hot air pays off in spades. So I'd probably have 1,000 or more followers if I were just posting gags from South Park. It'd be great if someone could develop a social media platform that filtered out all the unoriginal crap. Maybe that'll happen someday. I understand there's, the great new social media platform just is emerging this week, and who knows what the impact of that will be. I have no idea. I will not be an early adopter. Anyway, I'm just going to keep on doing what I'm doing, reviewing the music I love, and thanks to everyone who digs this original content and comes along with me. I guess I'll keep going as long as I have something to say. Okay, on with the show today. I do like this idea of reviewing summer music, so I'm going with it. The album I'm going to talk about today reminds me of summer for no particular reason other than I have a very strong memory of doing yard work in the house I grew up in and blasting this record on my vintage Toshiba boombox back in the day. I remember I was trimming forsythias, which is funny because I still have to do that. I have some in the yard and they're really invasive. They'll just take over if you let them. But I had copied this cassette from my friend and was just really getting into it at that time. This was maybe late high school, maybe senior year or so. I had no idea who this band was or anything. I think he might have had some of their earlier albums, I'm not sure, but I hadn't listened to them at all prior to this. So it was strange in the sense that I had very little context for this band. It wasn't something that my friends and I really talked about a lot, and we didn't really dig into the lore, as the kids say today. It was just an album that I had that I listened to, and all I knew was that I loved it. And of course, this album is Automatic by the Jesus and Mary Chain, a band that is especially influential and powerful. And why is that? Well, they're influential because they have a unique sound, especially at the early part of their career when they recorded with just tons of feedback, to the point where sounding like the Jesus and Mary Chain, it was kind of like a musical shorthand for just using lots of distortion and feedback. So this album has considerably less of that, but that's their reputation, and that's how they were innovative and influential. They're powerful because, for the most part, the Mary Chain's music is incredibly simple. This is a band that's truly embraced the core of rock and roll, and every now and then a band will come along that does that. It's the whole thing about having 3 chords and an attitude. In fact, the Mary Chain are kind of like AC/DC without the shredding. And who doesn't like AC/DC? No one, because everyone likes AC/DC. Your grandma liked AC/DC. And as a budding amateur guitarist, I'd play along with this record, and I was happy that I could play most of it pretty easily. It's funny now to think that I've been playing guitar for 30 or more years, but there was a pretty long time when I only knew a handful of open chords. So as I mentioned last time, I got my first guitar, the $4 Stella Acoustic, around 1990 or so. And my first guitar teacher, so to speak, was just a friend of mine who was left-handed, and I'm right-handed. So I had to hold his guitar upside down, and he taught me a bunch of the open chords, like, E, A, C, D, and G major. And it would be many years before I could handle a B or an F. And that's just embarrassing. Anyway, when I got my first guitar, that Stella, I had to relearn the chords right side up, and that was funny. But those 5 chords or so were all I could do for maybe 3 years. I guess you could say that, learning proper guitar wasn't really one of my top priorities at the time. I mean, I wasn't playing in bands or anything. I was just noodling around in my room trying to play along to records. In fact, a lot of what I was doing on that thing was just learning bass lines. I think I really wanted to learn how to play bass, not really a guitar. And another friend of mine had a bass once, and he let me play it, and it just seemed so much more approachable. But I distinctly remember hanging out with some friends and playing some guitar, and I saw another guy play chords that were like way up on the neck. And my other buddy and I were trying to suss out what the hell he was doing. Amazingly, we didn't ask him, and we didn't figure it out. If you don't ask, you don't learn, right? And we were just a bunch of knuckleheads. We're probably still a bunch of knuckleheads. But a couple years later, I'd gone to college, and I was in my dorm room, and a different friend grabbed my guitar and started doing the same thing. And I was like, whoa, whoa, whoa there, Ingve. How are you doing that? And he looked at me, of course, like I was crazy. Like, wait, you don't know what a bar chord is? And of course, I had to admit that, no, I didn't know what it was, not really. So he had to show me, and suddenly the heavens parted and the light shone down on us right through the window, and I could hear the heavenly choir, and I immediately got it. Putting your finger across the strings lets you slide the open chord shapes up and down the neck, which of course is very sensible in retrospect, very elegant, but it was like a revelation at the time. It obviously unlocked the entire fretboard as far as playing rhythm guitar went. And, from there I picked up a bit more theory, which chords went to which keys, chord variations, popular progressions, and that kind of thing. You learn your major and minor scales and keys and sevenths and ninths and so on. And I learned enough to play along to nearly any popular tune by ear. So to this day, I have kind of what I think of as a working knowledge of music theory, kind of like a punk rock knowledge of music theory, maybe one level up above the punk rock knowledge, but it's enough to get by with. And every now and then, of course, some musical prodigy throws in a suspended chord or, Mixolydian mode and just screws me all up. But it's funny how little theory you need to understand most popular music. I remember coming back to Automatic later after I'd been playing guitar for 10 or 15 years and had been in some actual bands. And I was really happy to see that all their songs pretty much used the three basic chords, the 1, the 4, and the 5. And every now and then they'd throw in something else to mix it up, but it was pretty rare. And for the most part, the Jesus and Mary chain are an amazing example of the power of 3 chords and an attitude. And apart from that, I just wish I had had some basic guitar lessons earlier on because I could have gotten much better quicker. But, I did everything the hard way and wound up where I am. So who are the Jesus and Mary chain? And as I said, I dubbed Automatic first from my friend on a cassette. I listened to it a lot in high school. It's one of those things that we would play a lot while driving around because this is excellent driving music. And, eventually we would branch out to some of their other albums. We especially liked Kill Surf City on the Barbed Wire Kisses album. But unlike a lot of the other bands we listened to, we didn't dig much into the band itself. The people in it, their earlier work and that kind of thing. We didn't have that mythology built up for them the way we did for some other bands that we were really into, like Nine Inch Nails or Ministry or Black Flag or whatever. We didn't know the personalities or kind of where they were coming from. All we had was the music. And, ultimately that's all you need. Like I said, there were certain bands we'd play driving around, and this was one of them for sure. I still play them when I'm just driving around. It sounds amazing. I put the car into safari mode. That's where you roll all the windows down, you open the sunroof, and you blast the Jesus and Mary chain. And I'll tell you what, everyone loves it. Everyone. Little babies, teenagers, small children, the elderly. They'll all turn their heads and nod in a knowing way. And sometimes they give you the finger guns because everyone loves the Jesus and Mary chain. Later, though, I'd read about them a bit in Spin or Rolling Stone, and I'd realize the band was essentially these 2 brothers from Scotland, Jim and William Reed, along with a rotating cast of other folks. And generally, William plays guitar and Jim sings, but sometimes they switch it up. And I guess my first taste of their attitude came when I saw them on MTV. And I can't find the clip today, but as I recall, it was the 2 of them being interviewed in 1992 when they played Lollapalooza. And they said something along the lines of, "We have the best songs and the best band, so we expect everyone to love us. Why wouldn't they?" And indeed, they had a point. So more about this particular album. I know they went through a lot of bandmates earlier in their career, and I know for a while that Bobby Gillespie of Primal Scream was their drummer. But by the time they got to this album, Automatic, it was just the 2 brothers playing to a drum machine and a synth bass. And I have to say it works really, really well on here. Of course, they always played live with a real drummer and bassist and sometimes with a second guitarist. And to me, that's important because I've learned you can't underestimate the power of a real drummer playing an acoustic drum set in a live situation. It just adds so much. There's something primal about that, seeing someone there beating the crap out of a drum set and making all that racket and really moving the air around. I remember the first time I played in a band with a real drummer, it was just a huge kick in the pants. It was like so much louder, so much more driving, so much more everything, It was like riding the rocket. And great music is about energy. It's about channeling that energy, and a good drummer can bring a ton of energy. But on disc, on the recording, you can get away with drum machines, and that's exactly what the Mary Chain do here. The bass on this record is just a slightly distorted synth, basically playing 16th root notes, and that's it. And I'm sure they used a synth with an arpeggiator, and they just played the bass lines with one finger. I'm sure it was very simple. I don't think there's any bass guitar in this album, actually. You could probably say that no drums or bass guitars were harmed in the making of this record, but it doesn't matter because it's still a masterpiece. And why is that? Again, because it's got a unique sound and it's very simple. That makes it innovative and powerful. And there's plenty of noise and distortion, which gives the drums and the bass a little more of a organic feel. The drum programs have a lot of variation, so they kind of sound like it could be a live take. The bass synth sounds like a synth, obviously, but it's very propulsive, just like it is in dance music. So it gives the tunes some extra energy. And I've noticed that when they play some of these songs live, the energy's different. It's more rocking rather than groovy, if that makes sense. But yeah, there's a dance element kind of to this album because it's somewhat mechanized, especially on the songs that use, that break beat instead of like a straight rock beat, where they're trying to make it sound a little more electronic. Plus, the Mary Chain always use a lot of hand percussion, which I love because it gives the rhythm track a very human feel. It adds a lot. You can't underestimate the impact of acoustic drums or hand percussion over drums because the hand percussion is huge. Tambourines and shakers and that stuff's like a secret weapon. And all of these tracks are super groovy, except maybe the one token ballad, but, of them, some of them swing more than others. So yeah, let's dig into the track list a little bit. The first track is Here Comes Alice. It's one of the swingier songs. It's kind of down-tempo and groovy, sort of sets the vibe for the record. It's super, super simple. Musically, it's just 1-4-5 and B-flat major. At one point, they throw in a G-sharp major just to spice it up, but that's it. You can play this song easily, right? That goes into Coast to Coast, which is more upbeat. It's probably my second favorite track on this record. It's got a great pulse to it. Guitar-wise, it's another 3-chord wonder. I should add that the production also is just freaking great on this album. The sounds are all crisp and punchy because, of course, it was engineered by the great Alan Moulder, so that explains that. But there's just enough noise and grit and atmosphere to keep things interesting. It doesn't sound too clinical. And it's just straightforward in a way that makes the recording timeless. It doesn't sound like an 80s record at all. Track 3 is Blues from a Gun. This was one of the singles, and I remember watching the video for this on MTV. It's kind of a mid-tempo dance beat with lots of kick drum, and the song has a few extra chords thrown in, so it's slightly more complex. They deliver all their vocals in this kind of flat, breathy monotone. Both of the Reeds sing on different songs on this record, and they do it in just the right way to give the vocals an attitude. It's not really traditional singing. It's more like pitched talking, if that makes sense. But the vocal melodies are all super, super simple. But I think it works really well. I think William sings on Blues from a Gun, which is a little unusual. The tune also has some super noisy guitar leads, which I love. It gives it more of a, we're about to fly over the guardrail and go down the hill kind of feel to it. And it balances that programmed rhythm section. Next is Between Planets. This sounds very much like Coast to Coast, which is great because I love Coast to Coast. It kind of makes you wonder why they put two such similar songs on the album almost next to each other. But I don't care. I'll take more of that. My band played this track live a few times, and it was just great fun. We did it with program bass and drums as well. So I was just playing guitar, and my buddies singing it, and it sounded great. It's just such a fun song. Track 5 is UV Ray. This is a pretty noisy tune. Lots of overdrive on the guitars. It kind of harkens back to their first album, Psycho Candy, which is a legendary album. I'll probably talk about that later. The ending to UV Ray just sort of builds up these layers of noise and feedback until it sounds like really epic. And it just ends in this sort of wall of noise, which is great. Track 6 is Her Way of Praying. And by now you've kind of figured out the formula, beat, synth bass, and 3 chords. And if I'm rushing through this track, it's because I want to get to the next one, which is Head On. Okay, so let's take a moment here. Materially, this song is just more of the same, right? It's just another 1-4-5 progression in C major, synth bass, pretty fast rock beat. But damn, this was the big hit. This was the second single after Blues from a Gun, and I remember seeing this video on MTV. It did a it did a fantastic job of making the band look really dynamic, despite the fact that they're just standing there moving very little. So it's one of those videos where there's a lot of like quick cuts and like zooming in on, the singer and zooming out and panning around. But if you look at it closely, you realize they're just standing there like lip syncing the song, which is awesome. But it's also a little disingenuous because it showed them as a full band, which, they weren't for the recording. But damn, what a song. There have definitely been times in my life when I considered this to be my favorite song ever, which is saying something. I'm someone who loves music. I love listening to a lot of different kinds of music. And this one's definitely up there. And I don't know what it is about it. It's got maybe the perfect rhythm with the crunchy muted guitar chords that I just love that. And the way the other guitar comes in and seems to sort of glide on top of that, like that blob of vanilla ice cream on the root beer float. And it's got this tasteful yet amazingly simple guitar solo. Or maybe it's because of the dramatic pause in the middle of the song. It's always a nice touch. Or it could be the lyrics. Generally on this album, the lyrics do very little for me. But in this song, they seem to capture that moment of takeoff. Like, here we go. And it's just great. I love everything about it. The song has good dynamics. It builds and releases. It's like riding a roller coaster, which, by the way, is one of the great tracks on their next album, but that's another story. And I know that Head On had an impact on the culture at the time, apart from just being one of my favorite songs ever. It was also a favorite of Black Francis from Pixies. So Pixies covered this tune just a year and a half later on their album Trompe le Monde. And I remember when that came out on 120 Minutes, and I remember watching it and being amazed that they covered it so quickly. And theirs, of course, is way less groovy and more rocky and noisy. They actually did 2 versions. So they did the version on their album in the studio, and then the music video was done as just a completely separate take. But yeah, I could definitely appreciate what a compliment it was to the Mary Chain for a band of Pixie stature to cover this song so quickly. It's sort of like when Jimi Hendrix covered Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band 3 days after it was released. Maybe not quite like that, but a compliment in the same vein. So yeah, if you haven't listened to the Jesus and Mary Chain, or if you aren't familiar with Automatic, at least check out Head On. It might get you into them. It's definitely my favorite of this bunch, and just a fantastic song in general. To the point where when I got my first drum machine, probably around 1998 or so, it was a Roland DR5 Dr. Rhythm, which I actually still have right here. It's a really weird box because it not only has drums, but it has a bunch of PCM instrument samples on it. So it almost acted like a little 4-track recorder where you could program entire arrangements, with drums and bass and strings or whatever. And it wasn't easy to program, but one of the first things I did with it was program Head On. And I remember playing along to that in my apartment back in the day, and it was just a blast. It just made me love the song even more, the fact that, I could play it. So Head On goes into track 8, which is Take It. This is kind of a 12-bar blues tune with a break beat. It's sort of notable for being pretty noisy and for just having this extended outro that has a lot of weird vocal samples. I have no idea what they're sampling, and I don't know, it's kind of funny. That goes into Halfway to Crazy, which is not quite a ballad, but it's a tune that has a bit of a softer feel. It's another one of my favorites on here because the lyrics and the vocals are very catchy and clever. And again, mostly three chords, but it has a slightly more complex arrangement that gives it a little more tension. The dynamics are interesting because it gets loud and then it gets really quiet. So that kind of maintains your interest over time. It's a really pretty song, which I can't really say about all of these tunes. So track 10 is Gimme Hell. This is another kind of noisy rocker with a break beat. I think the drums on this one are live. This might be the only one that has live drums on this record. They brought in a guest drummer. But it's got lots of grit and grime and feedback. And it probably has this album's only F-bomb. And it also has my favorite line, which is, well, I've been good and I've been mean and I've been looking for a Coke machine. You know, if you can work that into conversation, you're really winning. So try that out. But this is also the second track to mention Coke. The first was Here Comes Alice, in the context of a soft drink, I should clarify. But that song, Here Comes Alice, also mentions Pepsi, so I figure that kind of cancels out. And then we go on to maybe the most unusual track on this record, which is Drop, track 11. And this is kind of the black sheep of the album because it's an actual ballad. It's this beautiful little acoustic guitar number with no drums. And I love this song. It's still the first thing I play when I pick up a 12-string. The vocal melody works really well with these simple chords, which are generally just 1, 4, 5 again in G major. But at one point, you hit this change and you play an A major. And it's just like amazing. It's like a mind-blowing change. And the whole song is just 2 minutes long. But it's a real treat for the ears. You know, it's a great example of how you can make a moving song without spending a lot of time on it. You know, it doesn't have to be a super long song. And the final track here is Sunray, track 12. This is kind of more of an experimental thing. It's kind of just a dance beat with all this guitar noise and feedback over it. And it's pretty short. I guess Drop and Sunray were the bonus tracks on the CD, which is a shame because Drop is one of the better songs on the album. And to me, it's a welcome respite from their general formula. Proves that they can, you know, throw some other stuff in there. But that's the album, you know, and the cover art is pretty cool. There's actually an insert here. And you could see that this is a used copy that was a cutout, which is pretty funny. And they have all the lyrics in here. I think there's some pictures somewhere. Oh, yeah, pictures of William and Jim. And, you know, there's a little bit of info in here about how they recorded the album. It does say that Jim did all the vocals except for on Here Comes Alice, Blues from a Gun, and Drop, which were William. And that's nuts because to me they sound exactly alike. I don't know, maybe it's the vocal processing, but I would never have guessed that there were two vocalists on this record. But yeah, that's it. And why do I love it? Well, I respect that the Jesus and Mary chain hit the scene like an atom bomb. You know, their first album, Psycho Candy, blew a lot of minds because it was so noisy. And in the early days, their live shows were pretty much all riots, lots of fighting. They'd play for 10 minutes or whatever and would refuse to look at the audience. They'd play with their backs to the audience. And I get how important and cool that was, you know, and I understand how much it influenced the alternative scene. And it sort of taught other bands to copy that attitude. And that's great. But this album is the first of theirs I ever listened to. I think it updates their original sound with that impeccable production by Alan Moulder. The synths and the drum machines give it more of a new wave kind of feel while still keeping it classic. You know, it's punchy and it rocks, but it is kind of new wave. To me, listening to Head On for the first time was just like getting beaten over the head. I mean, it got my attention in a big way, and I wanted more. And this album delivers more in spades. If that's the sound you're looking for, this album's got it. It's basically got that one sound, and it sticks to it. But what I really love about it is what I've been saying all along. It's very powerful, and that power comes from its simplicity. It's the power of songs with just 3 chords. And, you know, a vocalist who can sing through a sneer. It's from coming out with a chip on your shoulder, and from not being afraid to record some dirt and grime or even straight up noise. I mean, who doesn't like some straight up noise? This album to me is just another example of, rock and roll. Again, it makes me think of bands like AC/DC, Motorhead, even like KMFDM in their way, because those are all bands that are not trying to be something they're not. And each of them has a recognizable sound, and they rely on the simple honesty of that sound. That's where their power comes from. And there's something pure about that, and it comes through when you listen, and that's why I love it. So where are they now? You may know that the Reed brothers have had something of a rocky relationship over the years. That's kind of an understatement, but they were fighting with each other long before the guys in Oasis would make that popular. But the Mary chain has broken up at times, and there were any number of oaths that they would never play again, but they're currently back together, and they released their 7th album, Damage and Joy, in 2017, and they played a few shows in 2022 as a 5-piece. So yeah, they're still out there and doing it. They have at least 3 European shows coming up in the second half of 2023, and they have a live album that was just announced that's coming out in August called Sunset 666. And I think that's a recording from 2018 when they toured with Isabel Campbell. So check that out. And there you have it, kids. Another classic album of summer, Automatic by the Jesus and Mary Chain. It's flawless and impeccable modern rock and roll. And it has something for everyone to enjoy. And it's an album you can use to reliably take you to a good headspace. So roll down the windows, play it loud, share the love, and you'll see what I mean. You've been listening to Stronger Than Reason on YouTube or as one of them there newfangled podcasts. And if you made it this far, just remember that the magic word is festoon. So use it in a sentence today and win. But don't tell anyone else. It's their own fault they didn't listen to the end. So keep that safe. Thanks for listening. And until next time, stay strong.